You're so welcome, and you'll feel very at home very soon, I'm sure. So thank you, Sue. Well, thank you all for being here. This is actually the second, or this is the third Zoom class I've done, and I was very skeptical about this format. But these have been such great experiences, and I'm just so happy. And this is definitely, I think this is a record for how many people I've actually spoken to. So forgive me if I show it, but I'm really excited that everyone's here. And I want to tell you about my business a little bit, and then get into some of my lessons that I've learned. It's going to be sort of a meandering talk and lots of room for questions. But I thought before we get started, and while it's still kind of bright out here, I'd just do a quick tour of my own vegetable garden, such as it is, and learning lessons all the time. Some of them you'll hear about as we go along, but we're right on the cusp of summer, so this still feels like a spring garden in many ways, and where it's full. And we've planted some summer things too, but as you can see, this is sugar snap peas that are just starting to flower. They've hit the top of the trellis, and I don't know where they're going from here, but we're gonna have a bunch of sugar snap peas very soon. This bed was full of salad greens, and we've been chipping away at it, one dahlia just for good measure. This is garlic that I planted last fall, hardneck garlic that is actually just starting to, I don't know if you can see this, but these little garlic scapes are just starting. So I don't know if anyone else has garlic that is scaping, but that's kind of a fun thing. We've got some cilantro that is about to flower. Cilantro is an amazing insectary plant. And so if you can leave it around and let it get all the way to flower, it's wonderful for bees and other pollinators. So I like to leave it around. We've got some kale, some lacinato kale. Actually, the birds have been eating the kale. I haven't figured out how to bird-proof my kale yet, but they were back here last year nibbling on the kale, so got lots of holes, but we don't mind. And then we've got some other kind of salad greens. We got some spinach that we need to eat ASAP because it looks like it's about to bolt. That heat has definitely triggered some of that. We've got some dill and some cilantro and arugula. I just watered out here, so everything's kind of flopped over. Some carrots that we grew from seed. This is actually the second planting of carrots. And lettuce. Carrots and lettuce are things that I love to grow successions of because they don't last forever, and I like to have both of them around a lot. Then over here is some fennel and some parsley. This fennel is just about ready to harvest, starting to kind of fatten, bulb up. And then this is the allium bed. So we've got tons of alliums. We've got leeks that we'll be harvesting in the fall. It's a long road with leeks. And then a bunch of onions, red tropea onions, cipollini onions, Walla Walla sweet onions. And then this is my pepper bed because we love peppers. A lot of jalapeno peppers, padron peppers. If you've never grown those are really interesting, fun one. Some Nardello peppers. Any Nardello fans out there? I'll bet there are. Sweet Jimmy Nardello peppers. And then this is like the first planting of carrots that are gonna probably be getting ready in the next couple of weeks. And then I just planted some beans and some more lettuce and cilantro from seeds. This is our little strawberry zone here, which is, we've already been harvesting our first strawberries, which is super exciting. And then we built some new raised beds just over the winter on the south side of the house here. These are actually all juniper. All the beds that you've been seeing, juniper is a really cool material. that alternative to cedar. That's great, really long lasting. Speaking of lessons, I'm just gonna show you close up. I kind of fried my tomatoes, which you might wonder, how do you do that? Well, you do that with these little Walla waters, which are wonderful tools for really early season kind of insulation during cold weather. But if it gets above about 75 degrees, it's about 95 plus inside these little containers. So they're coming back, but lessons learned. And then what I'm probably most excited about in this garden is this. Our blueberries, which we planted about 3 years ago, are finally really coming into their own. And that is a ripe blueberry, which is amazing. So a lot of those to come. So yeah, that's the quick thumbnail garden tour. All I see is myself, and all I hear is myself. So someone can tell me if Erica can tell me if she and you all can hear me and see me. But I'm just trusting that you can.
We can.
Oh,
and
good.
Maybe you want to ponder this question as you're going in.
Sure, yeah.
Someone wondered if the birds were trying to eat insects off your kale, and maybe that's why they were pecking at the kale.
It is possible. You know, the ones that we have the biggest problem with are the cabbage loopers, and I do spray BT pretty regularly for that. That's the main issue that we've had with the kale. But that's a good question. I hadn't actually considered that. So, welcome. Oh, that's a really bright sun right in your screen. Let's see. Is that better? I think so.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. So hi, I'm Ian. My business is Portland Edible Gardens, and I don't usually do like PowerPoints, but I got a little slideshow together, which I think is going to be much more interesting than my face for the most part. So I'm going to try to cue that up here. Tell me if this works. Are you seeing what I'm seeing?
We're seeing a whole bunch of pictures.
Yeah. How about now? Good?
Okay. Yep.
All right. So yeah, I'll give you just a little background on me and my business, and then I'll launch into my kind of meandering story of lessons I've learned in my vegetable garden. So I got into growing food actually mostly after college. My mom had a big ornamental garden growing up, and she was always dragging me out there to do garden work, but it didn't really click for me until after college. I actually got to spend some time on an apple orchard in Vermont, and I really got to just do a harvest season there, and just participating in that process and just being that close to food really turned me on to gardening and farming. And I ended up coming back to Portland, where I grew up, and found an apprenticeship on a farm down in the Willamette Valley. Did that for a year. Ended up going out to Hawaii and working at a program that did kind of farm therapy, and then found my way all the way to UC Santa Cruz. There's a organic farm and garden apprenticeship program there that I did, 2-year program, and ended up coming back to Portland. Managed 47th Avenue Farm, which is one of the oldest CSA farms here in town, and growing vegetables on over 20 acres for about 150 member CSA. And that was enough to dissuade me of wanting to actually start my own farm. But I was looking around the city and just seeing how much interest there is in this sort of, you know, in growing food and sustainability and all of, you know, all the things that Portland and the Pacific Northwest are sort of known for, and realizing that there was actually sort of a deficit of really hands-on support for getting help in your vegetable garden. And as we've all found, you know, just trying to Google your way to, you know, your answers about a garden is really difficult because gardens are so dynamic and so just place-based. I mean, even within your city, you know, there's microclimates, and it's just so complex. So I started Portland Edible Gardens, and we do a bunch of different things. A big part of what we do is building raised garden beds for people, and, you know, finding the right location, finding the right sun, setting people up, you know, bringing in the soil and setting up a drip irrigation system. So really getting the infrastructure set up so people can be really successful. And as people have maybe found out, you know, that's so much of the success of a garden is really what you do at the front end. And then, you know, for a lot of people, we follow that up with different sorts of garden support. So one thing we do is we create these seasonal planting plans that are sort of custom made for people's particular spaces and their interests. And we try to, can people see my cursor as I go through this or not?
Yes.
Okay. So, so yeah, just, you know, trying to come up with rows of vegetables of what we're going to plant where. These are planting dates. And then wherever possible, this is a, you know, a 4-foot by 8-foot garden bed. So we've got first plantings in spring, you know, kind of through late spring, early summer. And then wherever possible, we'd like to have a second planting in the same space. If we have really limited space, that can be a possibility. And then kind of along with this, some of the more detailed information of, make this smaller, of, you know, spacings and variety suggestions and how long something might take to grow to maturity. So giving people kind of a template for being successful in their garden. And then we follow that up for a lot of people with actual hands-on support in the garden, where we'll actually bring the seeds, bring the starts, bring all the organic amendments and tools that you might need, and actually work with you in the garden, kind of following the plan that we've created, and teaching people how to be really self-sufficient or doing it for them. But something tells me no one here is in that camp because you all want to learn. So families, all those things. So that's kind of a rough sketch of Portland Edible Gardens. And I do also have a blog that I keep more regularly in the spring and fall and winter, but on portlandediblegardens.com, where we do lots of little articles just about growing vegetables in this climate and in this area. And we also have an email newsletter and all that. So feel free to stay connected or check out our social media if you want to learn more about our services. So that's all I'll say about that. This is my daughter, Avery, who's downstairs, who you may hear here and there. This is last year. That is a bountiful spring garden right there. So let's see how we go forward here. There we go. So, and are you seeing this stuff in the way, or can you see the full picture here? I can't. I guess you see exactly what I see.
We can see it just fine. No, you don't need to do anything.
Oh, okay. So, you know, I start almost every talk with talking about sun, soil, and water. And I find so many people who get into vegetable gardening skip one or some of these steps and get right into, you know, they want to find the best tomato variety, and they want to talk about pruning methods and central leader versus, you know, different, should I pinch the the word that I can't think of, the suckers, thank you. They want to get into the nitty gritty, and meanwhile, maybe they don't have enough sun, or they don't have the proper soil, or they're just not watering their garden enough, or too much. So I always tell people, 75% of the success of your garden really is going to come down to sun, soil, and water. And so don't overlook those things. And sun is the biggest one, only because if you don't have the sun that you need, it's very difficult to do it unless you start cutting down your neighbor's trees and stuff like that. So in terms of sun with your property, you've kind of got what you've got. And we always talk about ideally having 6 hours of direct sun or more. Anything less than 6 hours, if you have locations where you're getting maybe 4 or 5 hours, that can be sufficient for growing leafy greens and certain things, mostly leafy greens, maybe some root vegetables, maybe some herbs. But really, even those things are going to be happier with more sun. And you're really not going to be able to grow tomatoes or peppers or zucchini. A lot of those really heat loving things need that 6+ hours of sun. And then soil, of course, is a huge one. And if you're growing in ground, unfortunately, this climate, this area, we have pretty fertile native soils. We have heavy soils, so a lot of people have some amount of clay or a lot of clay. But the good thing about clay is that it actually is very fertile, and it does need to be amended to try to get good drainage. And a compost is sort of the wonder amendment for whatever your soil is, and kind of neutralizing the difficult qualities. But soils are great around here. Obviously, if you're growing in raised garden beds, then you're going to be choosing the soil, and there's tons of choices out there. There's a lot of good choices. I'm actually less familiar with Clark County. I'd be curious to hear people kind of chime in about where soil comes from, where they like. We've used different sources. Probably the source that is most available everywhere in a lot of the specialty nurseries that we really like is called G&B Organics Raised Bed and Potting Mix. We've had a lot of success with that. So yeah, definitely want to spend good amount of time on just dialing in that soil. And then in terms of water, water is key. And as people will find as they go along, planting, harvesting vegetables sort of pales in comparison to the amount of time that you spend watering if you're hand watering. So that's where thinking about potentially a drip irrigation system or something like that, or some other kind of automated water, ultimately can be very helpful. The one caution with that is that I've found that once you have the auto water, it's very easy to overlook just spend less time in your garden because it doesn't need you as much. And I always feel like the healthiest gardens are actually the gardens that are hand watered and that are attentively hand watered. So that's a little bit on sun, soil, and water. Any questions, Erica, that you want to field on that?
There was one question that was just, what dissuaded you from managing your own farm?
Oh man, maybe if I was a stronger individual, I would be up for it. But I think, I had a very, I grew up in Portland. I grew up in an urban environment. My community has always been very urban. If you don't have land and you're trying to start a farm, there's just so many obstacles. Even if you do have land, there's a lot of obstacles to making it a livelihood. And ultimately I decided, I want to have a family. I want to stay connected to my community that's urban and don't have land, and I'm just not up for it. So I found a niche that feels really true to me in the end. So edible gardens come in many shapes and sizes. There's way more shapes and sizes than you're going to see, because pretty much every photo in this whole presentation is photos that I've taken from our work. So you're going to see a lot of raised beds, but there's lots of small container gardens. This is just kind of a little sampling of some of our kind of designs. Cedar is what we do use most often. It's the most readily available, really long-lived outdoor material, long-lasting. Don't want to use pressure-treated lumber for food safety issues. Here's a really long raised garden bed. You can put them right on the asphalt, drill some drainage holes along the bottom. This is a hot garden. Anytime you're against the house, like west or south facing, or over asphalt, that's going to be really, really hot garden space. These are some more juniper beds that we built with the drip irrigation in there. Another little kind of bench concept in a little courtyard. This one is actually up in Vancouver. You can get all kind of creative. We didn't build these beds, but this is a garden that we tend on the rooftop in the apartment in the Pearl. This is the Heartline apartment building. And then this is a project we did for PCC, a learning garden, their Cascade campus with juniper. Actually, this is a different kind of more finished juniper material. This is another commercial contract of ours, the Goat Blocks Apartments in Southeast Portland. This is another residence. We don't build steel garden beds, but there's steel, stone. People make them out of cinder blocks. So there's a little sampling. Any questions about raised garden beds before we move on, or growing spaces?
No.
Okay. So this is another one kind of back to the basics. But I mean, I feel really fortunate that I had a little bit of more formal education in horticulture, and there's a lot of master gardeners out there, I know, so you've had it as well. Again, sticking with what grows well and doing it at the right time of year. Sure, you might be able to grow sweet potatoes with a lot of black plastic and the right timing, but why not just grow potatoes, because they grow really well in this climate. So we're gonna kind of go through the seasons. I mean, this is a spring garden, or it could be a fall garden. Actually, it's I see kale back there, pretty mature kale. This might be a fall garden. As we'll see, spring and fall kind of mirror each other in terms of many of the things that we're planting, but we'll just start with spring. So spring, we're right on the edge of summer, but if you've lived in this climate for long enough, you know that mostly we expect cold, wet, dark weather. And so, don't try to stick those tomatoes in the ground in March. They're just going to turn into puddles of themselves by the time everyone else is planting their tomatoes in, beginning of May, or maybe end of April if you've got some different kind of insulation. But spring is the time for leafy greens, and it's salad time. So we've got arugula, we've got lettuce, spinach, bok choy. This looks like another arugula. We've got some sugar snap peas that we grow from seed that are going to need a trellis. They did get a trellis, by the way. And then we've got, this looks like, hard to say, maybe lettuce, things grown from seeds. So really it's salad time. So leafy greens, and especially, those tender leafy greens, many of the things in this Actually, everything that you're looking at here really doesn't like the heat. Some will tolerate a bit of it, you know, the peas and the lettuces, but arugula, bok choy, spinach, those things, they bolt so quickly above certain temperatures, and so they're really not. Grow them in the spring and the fall, and grow a lot of them, and grow successions of them. So here's more of the same: lettuce, spinach, lettuce for days, some cilantro down there, broccoli, kale, collard greens. These are wonderful things for the spring too. The broccoli and things like broccoli and cauliflower in particular. These broccolis, a trained eye will see that these broccolis are just past their prime, the way they're starting to kind of open up. We like to catch broccoli when it's really in a tight head, and broccoli can be a challenging one to grow. It's very finicky. It really doesn't like the heat, and even if you get it in right on time, we try to plant it kind of end of March, so that it's maturing hopefully in May, when hopefully we don't have really hot spells. But sometimes we still get hot weather at that time, and sometimes that'll cause premature bolting and flowering, or what you'd call buttoning in the case of cauliflower and broccoli. You put in all this work and you grow this huge plant, and then you get this one little tiny broccoli floret, and it can be very frustrating. So definitely broccoli is one that really got to go in the spring or in the fall. And here is, I told you those peas got a trellis. There it is. And it's sugar snap pea harvesting time. Snow peas, of course, are options, English peas. And they have a nice long harvest window. And they really grow best from seeds, and pretty easily. Radishes, another great one for the spring. I believe this is a variety called Cherryette. There's lots of varieties of those kind of traditional radishes. Another very heat sensitive, bolt prone vegetable that should be grown from seed, like all root vegetables for the most part. Lettuce. Here's a nice spring harvest lettuce. These are these Hakuri turnips. If you think you don't like turnips, try growing Hakuri turnips. These Japanese salad turnips are really tender and sweet and super succulent. It's a little late now, but in March and April we're planting a lot of Hakuri turnips. There's some fennel, some spring onions, some broccoli, more kale, and a happy gardener. Another spring harvest. A little bit later on, we've got kohlrabi, we've got some chard, we've got some fava beans, mature carrots. It's hard to really get mature carrots sooner than about middle of June, because they take quite a long time to grow. Any questions about spring?
A question that says, when my first crop of lettuce is finished, I plant a second crop in July and have it survive if it's put in the shade.
Yeah, so succession planting. So yeah, this is something I hadn't really had on the list, but a great thing that people often ask about. What is succession planting? First, succession planting is planting more than one planting of a particular vegetable throughout the year, so that you can have a sustained harvest over time. And there's certain things that really make a lot of sense for succession planting, and then there's certain things that don't. So tomatoes, for instance, they need a very long time to mature. They need to go in at a pretty particular time, and then they have hopefully a nice long harvest window of several weeks to even a couple of months if we get really lucky with a nice mild fall. So it doesn't really make sense to plant tomatoes on early May and then plant more in June. You're just going to have a later, shorter harvest. But lettuce, on the other hand, very quick to grow and then very quick to go. And in the spring, it can take 30 to 45 days to grow a mature head of lettuce from starts. And then you've got maybe somewhere between 2 and, at the most, a month of harvest window until that thing is done. In the most of the growing season, 2 weeks in the heat of the summer, 2 weeks is about all you have. So lettuce in particular is one that you really want to, if you want to have lettuce all the time, you should really be planting it, small quantities of it every, 2 to 4 weeks, depending. And I try to get, good planting of lettuce in every 3 weeks, and I'll plant maybe a dozen plants every 3 weeks, because I know that's about how much we can get through during that, time. So that first one comes on, and then 40, 50 days later it's done. But you've already, if you're planting on that day 50, then you've got to wait another month until your lettuce comes in. So hopefully you've planted, 3 weeks after your first planting, you've planted some more. And lettuce is the one kind of salad green that does have more sort of heat tolerance than, say, arugula or spinach or mustard greens or some of these other tender greens. And even within that, there are particular, we have someone's drawing. Someone's making us a drawing, or me. There are particular varieties that are more heat tolerant than others. And in the heat of the summer, pretty much starting now for the next couple of months, we're going to be planting really heat tolerant lettuces. And if you're planting from starts, you can see the tags usually will say if it's heat tolerant. And there's also sort of subtypes of lettuce like crisp head or summer crisp lettuces that are very heat tolerant. So summertime, it's this is, the gardens are in their fullest, and it's the time when we have, oh my gosh, it's already 7:40. I'm going to try to pick up the pace a little bit so I can leave space for questions, because I know people are going to have them. So we've got a lot of variety. We've got tomatoes, mature tomatoes back here. We've got, mature kale from the spring that's still hanging on. Onions are maturing. We've got beets. We've still got some tender greens like this looks like maybe kohlrabi, and some chard. We've got squashes. These are winter squashes, tomatoes, peppers. So, peak garden time. Summer. Beans, pole beans, bush beans, jalapeno peppers. There's Avery. She grew. So did that tomato. That's a Brandywine tomato. Love the Brandywine. Sun Gold. Quick tomato detour, because everyone always wants to talk about tomatoes. Sun Gold, a beloved cherry. There's a bunch of Sun Golds. Here's some of my favorite tomatoes. Sun Golds, Brandywines, Green Zebra, not a favorite, but a really unique looking tomato. More acidic, but pretty fun one. Good crowd pleaser. And Stupisse. This is one of my favorite indeterminate types. So it makes a ton of fruit, really firm, great for roasting, great for salads, great for sauce, very versatile tomato. Oh, here's some favorites. Stupisse, Cherokee Purple, another great heirloom, Brandywine, Sun Gold, and then Anna Russian is a personal favorite, an heirloom that is not very productive, but probably my favorite tomato for flavor that I've ever had. Really, really kind of nice heart-shaped, medium-sized, late to mature, delicate, all the hard things that most good tomatoes have going for them. Blush, another fun kind of newer tomato, very firm, sweet. It's a cool one. Here's a summer harvest. Basil, scallions, lemon cucumbers. It's a fun one if you haven't grown it. One lemon cucumber plant, you'll be buried in these lemon cucumbers. It's pretty wild. So fall, we've got this, fall's an interesting time. And again, I should note, we're talking about, when I say summer vegetables, I'm talking about what we're harvesting during the summer, not necessarily what we're planting during the summer. Planting dates are much more difficult to figure out and take a little bit more detective work, because you want to be harvesting that tomato in the summer, but for tomatoes you're going to want to be planting probably in May, although you can get away with planting as late as June sometimes. But for other summer vegetables like basil, for instance, basil really is unhappy in the cool weather that May usually has. So usually I wait till June to plant basil. So fall, fall is really variable. I mean, sometimes we have really dry, beautiful Septembers, even into October. Other years, September 1st, and get a big rain that spoils all the tomatoes, and that's kind of it for tomatoes. But again, in general, we're having diminishing sunlight and cooler temperatures, and we're having shorter and shorter days. So one thing that happens is we run out of growing power really quickly. And what I mean by that is really temperature and day length. August, everything is growing so fast. We've still got long days. We've got a lot of heat. We've got a lot of days above 80 degrees or maybe even 90 degrees. And then there's a real shift, and that temperature shift really slows down vegetative growth. And also, as days get shorter, vegetative growth slows down. So if you want to have all of these things growing in your garden in the fall or the winter, which we'll also talk about, the timing of planting is very, very important. And I've written blog posts about this. I teach classes about this at Portland Nursery most years. And there's some great charts. I think there's a blog. Territorial has a great winter gardening chart that is pretty dialed in for our climate about what to plant when. But like kale, for instance, we usually plant sometime between August 1st and August 15th. Later than August 15th, many years, we just run out of temperature and day length to grow that kale into a nice mature size. And if you do get the timing right, there's huge benefits, because it grows into its maturity, and then it just basically slows down, and all that growth grinds to a halt in October and November, essentially. And then you've got a garden that looks like this, that can be harvested for months potentially, instead of just weeks as it would in the summer. So you get really long harvest windows with the fall and winter vegetable gardens. This was a fun project because we built all these beds. This is actually half of the garden. We built all these beds in the late summer, and then it was like, oh, time to plant, and it was time for fall and winter vegetables. So the other challenge with fall and winter vegetables is, because you're planting in August or September, that's times when most gardens are full of tomatoes and peppers and corn and all the summer things. And if you have really limited space, you really have to do some good planning in order to have enough space to plant out fall and winter vegetables. But this is kind of one of those funny situations where we just had a whole garden that just needed to be planted. And so we grew a lot of fall and winter vegetables. Carrots you can pretty much grow 4 seasons. They're amazing, but they're really best. That's the other thing to say is flavor wise, things are much better in many of the things, and especially root vegetables have much better flavor in the winter, because actually freezing temperatures cause them to secrete sugars in order to protect themselves against frost damage, and they become sweeter.
broccoli, more bok choy, why not? Here's a nice fall harvest of a bunch of winter squash. We've still got some peppers hanging on, bunch of onions, it looks like, lots of stuff. And then we've mulched these beds with straw, which is what we do for most of our garden beds in the fall, to protect them again, from getting rain, compaction, and to insulate the soil and protect the microbial life, and makes it much easier to work with them in the spring, or in the spring. And of course, garlic, the kind of the October vegetable planting. Sometimes we call it the last planting of the year, but it's probably more accurate to call it the first planting of the following year, because it's not harvestable until, summer of following year. Another little straw situation. Or you can grow a cover crop, of course. This is my garden as well before we had raised garden beds. Even as we were building raised garden beds all over the city, I was still stuck in my my stubborn farm streak, and I gave way, and it's been great. Winter, so many of the same things, but just a continuation. We've got radicchio, wonderful bitter green, more kale and collards, more kale. There's a parsnip. This is we manage the garden at the Waverly Country Club, and that's the Chef Nadav. That's a parsnip that they dug out with a couple of forks. Good looking parsnip. Grow from seeds. It's almost 8, so I think I'm just gonna, I want to have time for questions, so I'm gonna kind of breeze through this. Come back for the Grow from Seeds class in just a few weeks, please. I love growing from seeds. People are scared of it. Don't be scared. It really isn't that hard. You just need to keep a few things in mind. And there's some great kind of starter seeds that you can use, or just things that are easier to grow. Beans are a great one for like right now. I just planted beans. Plant some beans in your garden. They love to grow from seed. They germinate very easily. They're wonderful, way better, harvested from your garden in the store. Radishes are another classic one. We'll talk about thinning in that class. These are French breakfast radishes. Thinning the radishes. Carrots, baby carrots. Drip irrigation is a lifesaver. This is a typical drip irrigation setup that we install for the raised beds we have, with 1/4-inch drip lines. And we like these drip lines have emitters every 6 inches, which you don't really find this material at the box stores. You got to order it online. But if you're really planting intensively the way that we do, and the way that you may, I find that the drip lines with the 12-inch emitter spacing, I mean, you've only got 8 emitters in this whole bed. And if you're trying to grow seeds and stuff, you just don't get good coverage. So don't be shy about putting a bunch of lines with that real close emitter spacing, and you just have to run a shorter watering set, but you get really complete coverage, and it's wonderful. Saves a lot of water, pretty easy to deal with. Ultimately, that's a little emitter. This is a close-up of the same materials, and then you can grow things really densely. There's sugar snap peas growing on a trellis. And then these are just some kind of fun pictures of people to round it out. Kiddos, happy gardeners, planting with the kids. There's me. I think I'm done. So ask away. Hopefully there's someone still out there.
There are a lot of questions. The first is, does it help to pinch the flowers off bolting cabbages?
Not really. Once there's certain things that it does help to pinch the flowers off, like kale, for instance. If it starts to, well, for one, the immature flowers of kale are delicious. They're called rapini or rob. But if you're just trying to get leaves, then pinching back can help. But in the case of cabbages, where you're trying to get this nice big head, it's sort of the damage is done.
And how about when is a good time to plant fava beans?
Mm. So fava beans are some of the first things we plant. Some people actually fall plant fava beans, which I've done a few times. And so you could plant them in like, October or late September, and they'll just kind of sit around and just slowly germinate and then come up really early in the spring. But typically we plant fava beans in February around the same time that we would plant sugar snap peas or snow peas.
And there were several questions about the juniper that you mentioned. Where can you get it? And then what's
Yeah.
the lifespan of juniper and cedar?
Yeah, so the juniper, the only place that I know to get it is here in Southeast Portland. There's a place called Sustainable Northwest Wood, that's kind of lower Clinton Street, and they have a bunch of different stuff. They have different grades of the juniper. It's very affordable, and they've had some amazingly successful trials and studies at OSU about longevity of juniper. And it's supposed to last like 25 plus years outdoors. They have some trials that are still going that are, I think, like going on 30 years, and it's holding up. Whereas even cedar, we hope for about 15 years out of the beds that we're building, but sometimes as little as 10 depending on the material. So yeah, juniper is a good thing.
Next is, can you give advice on establishing an asparagus patch?
Not really, because I've never done it actually. No, that's not true. I have planted asparagus for a couple of clients. I've never grown it for myself. From what I know, it's planted from crowns, from these little alien-looking dormant things in really, really early spring. And I know they want really well-drained, fertile soil, and they take a couple of years to really get going. So you're actually not supposed to harvest the asparagus during the first year and just let it grow all the way to its, really cool, wacky-looking flowers, and then, cut it back in the fall, and that'll help it really get established. That's about as much as I can tell you about asparagus.
Okay, the next question says, I water my raised beds by hand. How do I figure out if I'm getting my plants the right amount? For example, recommendation of 1 inch per week for pumpkins.
Yeah, don't get too hung up on the inches per week. I couldn't really even tell you what that means if I was hand watering. I'm mostly thinking about where the root zone of that plant is, and the best way is really to use your hands, and after watering, dig down and actually see how far down is that moisture actually percolating down. Because the beginning gardeners and even some intermediate gardeners, it's very easy to convince yourself that you've watered because the surface of the soil looks wet, but that water really isn't going down more than half an inch or something, and then it's just evaporating out, and you can really starve your plants out that way. So the best way is really, like sometimes I'll water my plant, and then or as a demonstration, I'll water where the plants are, and I'll also water an open spot in the garden just equally. And that way I can dig down where I just watered without digging and disrupting the roots of, my newly planted vegetables, and actually see like how far is that going down. And I, it is harder to overwater than to underwater, though it's certainly possible. I would say if you really have questions, verge on the side of overwatering, and you'll also find that for especially right at the beginning for really young plants, right after I plant things from starts, I give them a good soak. I just soak them all the way to the bottom, and that's such a sensitive time for plants that if they don't get the right amount of water early, then they can really have stunted growth and other kind of consequences down the road.
Okay, next question is, when I tried to use straw as a winter cover, I got a great crop of wheat in the spring.
Yeah.
How to use straw without planting a crop?
Yeah, it's I've still yet to find straw that's actually clean and doesn't have seeds in it. And so as long as you're fairly timely in removing, I mean, I'm usually pulling that straw off sometime in, you know, if I see a really nice sunny window in February, I'll get in there and take the straw off and do some nice, you know, add some compost and amend. But sometimes not until March. And as long as you're getting in there by March, usually those the wheat or the rye or whatever it is that you've inadvertently planted are not super deeply rooted, and they certainly haven't gone to seed. And I just pull them out with the straw. I've accepted that.
Next is there anything we can plant this month?
Yeah, lots of things. I mean, I always think of June 15th as sort of the end of the road for a lot of summer vegetables. So for things like, you know, peppers and eggplants and tomatoes and, you know, zucchini grows a little more quickly. So zucchini would probably be fine, but, you know, we don't plant any of those summer things later than middle of June. But even now, you know, all those things should be just fine. And I mean, you can still plant like a lot of root vegetables, probably not radishes or turnips, but certainly carrots and beets. And middle of June is actually the ideal time for planting parsnips that you're going to harvest in the winter. It's sort of the first winter planting. Actually, that's probably leeks or the first winter planting. But you could plant those things. You could plant annual herbs like basil, parsley. You know, cilantro is very heat sensitive, but I like to grow cilantro from seed, and I love cilantro, but it's so quick to bolt that I treat it like lettuce. Anytime I'm planting lettuce, I plant a really small amount of cilantro as well. You could still plant, you know, kale. I mean, it probably have a little rougher go than kale that's planted early. Kale, chard, and collard greens are kind of all in that same boat. Beans, I mean, it's prime time. It's like, you know, perfect time for starting beans, whether they're bush beans or pole beans. So lots of stuff. Lettuce, of course.
And how about with raised beds, do you put in new soil every year or just amend the existing soil from your first year?
Yeah, you shouldn't have to put in new soil. I mean, a good soil should be able to just be amended, and you'll definitely want to, you know, be adding compost every spring to maintain a really high level of organic matter and add some nutrients back into the soil. And then, you know, most compost, unless it's manure based, does not have sufficient nitrogen to replace what most vegetable gardeners are taking out in the form of the harvest. So we always are also supplementing or complementing the one-time spring compost application with some kind of granular fertilizer whenever we're planting. And if you really, you know, people get themselves into trouble when they start with a great soil and then they just don't amend with, you know, compost or fertilizer for you know, a couple of years, and they think, oh wow, this garden is just amazing, and then over time it becomes depleted, and it becomes much harder to kind of get back up to a really nice fertile level once you've become depleted. So yeah, just get in those seasonal habits of fertilizing and composting, and you should be fine.
Okay, and someone's asking, is it too late for corn?
It's getting late. If you've got the space, I'd say, you know, go for it. I would probably plant it from starts, and if you can find really young starts, corn really grows best from seeds, but it's a little late to be planting seed corn. You might be all right. It just depends on the summer that we're going to have. I would say don't give up on corn.
And then should lemon cucumbers be planted from starts or seeds?
Either, you know, the squash family is very, so cucumbers and zucchinis and melons are very sensitive to being transplanted. And so if you do transplant them, you don't want to you don't want starts that have been sitting around for too long. You want to find really young ones and be really delicate in transplanting. But they also germinate very quickly, provided the soil temperature is warm enough. So they would, it's certainly not too late to plant those things from seed. If you get it in, especially if you do it, tomorrow, and it has a couple of nice warm days to germinate before we get more rain.
So the last question is, do you also hire out to build compost enclosures?
We do some of that in the shoulder seasons. We're actually booked out on raised garden bed projects through the end of July right now. And so not at the moment, but we do sometimes, yeah.
Okay, well, I think if John wants to go ahead and come back up, I think, oh, we got one more latecomer, and it was, how often do you fertilize? We'll make that our last one.
Yeah, I try to fertilize a little bit every time I plant. So I just make a habit of that. And, you don't have to get too crazy with it. I mean, maybe a tablespoon per planting hole for some of the, quicker growing things like lettuces, or just a very light sprinkling. But yeah, I do it every time I plant. I wish I could see all your faces now. Well, thank you all for being here. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Well, Ian, yeah, I want to thank you for coming out and speaking to us tonight. That was a ton of good information. And I'll just share with you, I'm really jealous of your garden. Mine doesn't look anything like that yet, but it's going to.
It will.
I love your craftsmanship on your woodwork. It's really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lots of good information. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I just want to let folks know that we're going to attempt to make the recording available on our website. So we have all of the videos from our recent presentations there. If you just go to the Clark County Extension Master Gardener Program web pages, you can find our upcoming events, and you can find videos from our recently aired events. So thanks again, Ian. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good. I'll see you then.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for attending.
I guess I'll go now.